Hello. So in this video, we're going to continue with solving for x. Okay, so we're going to look at some other scenarios as compared to last time. So let's take a look at the first problem. So let's say you have x squared is equal to 37, and intuitively, if you just look at this, you'll be like, okay, fine, in order to solve for x, I can just take the square root of both sides. And if you thought that, that would be the correct approach. So I take the square root of both sides. And then, as we mentioned earlier, these two basically nullify each other. So you have x is equal to square root of 37. Now, you do not need to simplify this any further. And the reason for that is because 37 cannot be factored. Okay. Now, you really do not need to go ahead and use your calculator at this point in time to get the square root of 37. If you did that, you would get an answer, but most problems like this don't require you to provide an answer without the radical. It basically expects you to keep this as your answer. Now, a few things to note out here. Since you're taking the square root of, since the initial problem, let's see, since the initial problem was x squared is equal to 37, right? When you take the square root, you could end up with two types of signs, okay? Which means, so let's take, for example, let me show you out here. Let's say you had -2 and you multiplied this, you took the square of -2. Well, that would be -2 times -2, right? So the negatives and negatives would make a positive, and 2 times 2 would make a 4. So you get 4. What if you had +2 squared? Well, then that would also give you 4. So therefore, if you had to take the square root of 4, if you had to find the square root of 4, then you don't know if the answer is going to be +2 or -2, right? The answer could be both. So likewise, out here, the answer is going to be, you have to write it as positive square root of 37 or negative square root of 37. And you could also write this as plus minus square root of 37. They're all the same. So you either choose this as your answer or choose to write this as your answer. Okay? All right. Let's try another one. This time we're going to give you a number that can be factored. So you have m squared is equal to square root of 128. Oh, so I'm sorry, just 128. So to find, of course, to find the value of m, you take the square root of both sides. And when you do that, that becomes plus minus. So therefore you get m is equal to plus minus square root of 128. Now, the key out here when you look at this number, you want to look for a hidden square inside this number. So if you take 128 and you just divide it by 2, so we can say 2 is one of the factors. So 2 times 64 gives you 128, but 64 is a perfect square, right? So you can rewrite the 128 as square root of 64 times 2, and now that's essentially equal to square root of 64 times square root of 2, and square root of 64 is 8, right? So plus minus 8 square root of 2, and that is your answer. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Let's say we have a problem like this, where you're given a trinomial, 2x squared minus x plus 3 is equal to 0. So now your job is to go ahead and factor this trinomial, at least try to factor it, okay? So we'll try to factor this trinomial. So 3 and 2, right? So 3 times 2 is equal to 6, and factors of 6 are that are going to give you a -1, so you can take a -3 and a +2, and that's going to give you a -1. So let's go ahead and try to factor that. 2x squared minus 3x plus 2x plus 3 is equal to 0. And let's group them now. So 2x squared minus 3x plus 2x plus 3 is equal to 0. And now let's go ahead and pull however many factors we can pull out. So x, we need 2x minus 3 The second one becomes 1 times 2x plus 3. Now be careful out here. If you look at these two, you can see this term does not match this term. Even though the 2x and the 3 are identical, because the signs don't match, they're not a perfect match. Therefore, do not proceed further, because this is not the correct way. So essentially what we're saying out here is that this, or rather this trinomial, cannot be factored. Okay, but just because it cannot be factored doesn't mean you cannot solve for x. So if it cannot be factored, you have to use something called the quadratic formula to solve it. Quadratic formula, and I'm going to go ahead and push this out to the side out here and write it in green. Change that to green. Okay, so what's the quadratic formula? So the quadratic formula basically says if you have an equation of this form with the trinomial ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, then x is equal to minus b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, the whole thing divided by 2 times a. So all you have to do to apply the quadratic formula, figure out what's the a, the b, and the c, okay, in the expression given to you. So the expression given to you is 2x squared minus x plus 3, right, is equal to 0. Okay, so the a is equal to 2, the b is equal to -1, and the c is equal to 3. So let's go ahead and plug that into the quadratic formula. So we write x is equal to minus of -1, which is the b, plus minus square root of b squared, which is -1 squared, minus 4 times 2 times 3. Now this might be a little hard to follow, so feel free to pause the video and try to write it out yourself as you do this, okay? So it makes more sense. So you write, and then at the bottom you write 2 times 2, which is the a. Now let's go ahead and simplify this. So the first term becomes 1 plus minus square root of 1 minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 3 is 24. The whole thing is over 4. So that's 1 plus minus square root of -23 over 4. All right, and that's literally where the buck stops, okay? So you can't do anything else with this. So you can leave your answer like this, x is equal to this, okay? Or you can say x is equal to 1 plus square root of -23 over 4, or 1 minus square root of -23 over 4, okay? And just a brief mention out here, you can't take a square root of a negative number, so therefore that stays underneath it. But later on, depending upon how much math you learn, you can actually pull the negative sign out with a 1 and call it an I. But that's beyond the scope of this video, so let's not worry about it. Okay, let's do one more problem before we wrap this video up. So let's say you're given x times 5x minus 1 is equal to 0. Go ahead and try to pause the video and then try to solve the problem. And then you can watch it after trying to solve it. All right, so when you're given a problem like this, where you have, two terms multiplied together and that's equal to 0, just remember what we learned before. When you have a times b is equal to 0, then either a is equal to 0 or b is equal to 0. So you can go ahead and, I'm sorry, I think I copied the problem down wrong. So that is 1. That is equal to 1. So therefore, you cannot use actually this. Why? Because out here you have to have 0 in order to use this formula, this theory. So what we're going to do is, when you have 1 on this side, then you have to just break this down. So you have to distribute it out and simplify. So let's go ahead and distribute it. So the x times the 5x and then the x times the -1 first. gives me 5x squared minus x is equal to 1. Pull the 1 over to the left-hand side and leave a 0 on the right. And there you have it, okay? So now this is a trinomial. Now, if you want to save time, because you're really trying to solve for x, you could directly use the quadratic formula. It works for problems of this kind, okay? So let's go ahead and directly use the quadratic formula and get some practice with it. So let's identify the a, the b, and the c. So the a is a 5, the b is negative 1, and c is negative 1. Okay, so x is equal to minus b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, and the whole thing divided by 2a. All right, so minus b is minus of minus 1 plus minus square root of minus 1 square minus 4 times 5 times negative 1. Whole thing is over 2 times 5. Let's simplify. So that's 1 plus minus square root of 1 plus 4 times 5 is 20 over 10. 1 plus minus square root of 21 over 10. Okay, so 21 is 3 times 7, so let's keep that under the radical since there's no perfect square hiding inside this, okay? So let's call that, so the answer, essentially, we can leave this like this, or we can break it up, right? So we can say x is equal to 1 plus square root of 21 over 10, or 1 minus square root of 21 over 10. And there you have it, okay? Hopefully that made sense. Thank you for watching.